Welcome back. Now, an issue that most of us are obviously grappling with at the moment. Food price inflation in South Africa has been continuing on an upward spiral despite headline or total inflation actually easing over the last few months. Annual consumer price inflation was 6.9% in the month of January, and that was down from 7.2% in December 2022. Yet the latest consumer price index data from Stats SA from January 2023 showed that food price inflation actually hit a 14-year high at 13.4%. Now, notably, the Competition Commission has launched an investigation into the price of essential food products that the Commission suspects to be opportunistically increased. Marlene Louw is a Senior Economist at AgriBusiness SA, and she joins us now virtually to discuss the impact of this on the general South African household. Marlene, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I think, it's common cause that food and energy inflation are accelerating and at an alarming rate. And this, of course, while headline inflation is said to be easing. So what are the main drivers of this at this point?
So I don't think this is a new phenomenon, right? Since mid-2021, we've actually seen a myriad of global factors causing disruptions in food value chains and driving production costs up. So this ranges from the war in the Ukraine, drought and dry conditions in key grain production areas, supply chain disruptions, problems with getting access to agricultural inputs, and a range of other global factors. So if you look at other countries, food inflation also remains to be a problem. And I think what aggravates our situation in South Africa is the fact that load shedding rapidly increases costs throughout the chain as well. So I think in January and February, we've seen the effects of really intense load shedding on food chains as well.
So, Marlene, some economists have, of course, said that food price inflation is stabilizing. What's your own observation, though, when you make a comparison, for example, using the same food items in a basket over different periods?
Yes, so our sense is also that it needs to stabilize in the months to come. I think there's two main reasons. The first is that the base effects of 2022 will start to come into play. So if I'm talking about base effects, it's what happened last year and in March. So if you think back, that is when we really saw the big effects of the Russian war and prices escalating in that month. So in that sense, we'll see inflation easing relative to what happened in 2022. And then the second reason is that there is a definite decreasing trend in key basket items such as red meat and grains or maize. So even though that haven't filtered through to the retail context yet, there is scientific research to suggest that it takes about 4 months from when commodity prices start to decrease for that to filter through to a retail context. And I think what should also be borne in mind is that even if you do see a commodity price decrease, it's not to say that you'll see a proportional decrease in retail prices. And the reason being that the cost in the chain doesn't necessarily decrease according to what you would see in commodity prices. And in South Africa, this is a reality, given that we are facing huge load shedding constraints.
Now, Marlene, there is, of course, that irony that South Africa actually doesn't have a food insecurity problem, but rather households that don't have food. So if you will, if we can just touch on that for a moment, talk about that with regard to the fact that there's plenty. There's a lot of food on the shop shelves, but people are still going hungry. And some of the reasons for that would be that people either don't have the money to buy food, or if you will, can we make a link to some of the social instability that we are seeing with regard to some of the social ills we're contending with, like unemployment and inequality?
Yes, definitely. So I think if we look back to other parts of the world in history, food prices was definitely a catalyst for social unrest. So the Arab Spring most notably started as a result of extremely high staple food or bread prices. So I think there's definitely a link to be made. The issue is, as you rightly say, there is enough food. We see yet another bumper grain and oilseed harvest in South Africa. So the issue is enabling the population through economic growth to buy food with their disposable income, and I think that is where we are lagging behind.
So we know that the Competition Commission, they've indicated that they will actually be investigating price collusion for some food items. But then the question is, Marlene, why does government, for example, not cap certain items such as bread in order to regulate basic food prices, not to go over a certain price, instead of, letting the market determine where that goes, especially given the fact that we have such high unemployment rates, as an example?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think if you're trained as a economist, we are taught that a market system optimizes resources. So, I mean, if you were to regulate bread prices, it's not to say that would necessarily reflect what the underlying production cost for that bread is, and if you aren't able to recoup the production cost associated with a certain product, then a firm or a producer would simply stop producing that. So my sense is the market system is not the problem. My sense is also that the fundamentals that we've been seeing over the last 18 months are the drivers of what food inflation is showing at the moment, and it's not necessarily an effect of price exploitation. So I would not blame the market system. As you previously pointed out, it's an issue of enabling consumers to access food through economic growth and employment.
So if we look at some of the external drivers, you mentioned earlier the Russia-Ukraine war and, of course, the sort of impact that has on inflation. But can government, for example, not be proactive, Marlene, to try and mitigate against such risks as this war that's currently waging in Russia, in the Ukraine, I should say. So why can't we mitigate against that? Why can't we, given the vast tracts of land we have in this country, arable land, why aren't we trying to do more in that regard? Or if not, why aren't we keeping strategic reserves of those sort of items that we know will be in short supply?
So strategic reserves is a fickle issue, right? It costs a lot of money to run these reserves that we have to come out of the fiscus. And so a lot of countries that does it really bear the burden of those costs. And then obviously it disrupts the market. So it creates huge volatility in prices. So government would buy at certain points and then release a lot of stocks at certain points with the ultimate objective to keep prices below a certain point or stable. But I think in a lot of cases that actually has the opposite effect. If you look to China and their pork reserve program that they have, there was actually Bitcoin-like volatility in pork prices in China, simply because of the buying and releasing of reserves from these programs. So my sense is that South Africa is a small economy playing on the global stage, and so we're essentially impacted by what happens in the rest of the world. And what government can do to enable food security is to ensure that we remain competitive. So I think South African agricultural producers are probably some of the best producers in the world, economically and technically. But there are issues beyond the farm gate that are hampering our competitiveness. So our logistical system, our ports, again, I'm mentioning our electricity. All these things are at play, weighing on producer margins and affecting their ability to produce sustainably. And this is also a reality for the rest of the value chain players. So my sense is that our focus should be to create an enabling economy rather than to spend huge amounts of money on reserve programs.
Well, Marlene, we'll have to leave it there for today, but thanks so much for your time. Marlene Louw is a Senior Economist at AgriBusiness SA, talking to us about the economy, food prices, and of course, generally the cost of living for households in South Africa and how that is escalating. Let us know your thoughts at Morning Live SABC.